Let's cap the Withers Day card with the man who makes the morning line, David Aragona, coming up next. Salutations and welcome, friends. I'm your host for this episode of Capping the Card. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Welcome to another edition of Capping the Card, where myself and a trusted guest go through an entire card on the weekend slate and give you our top pick and top value play for every single race. It's a great way to get a lot of information about a particular card pretty quickly. And this week, we are going to be going to Aqueduct, which is, of course, hosting the Grade 3 Withers, a major Kentucky Derby prep race that was, of course, postponed from last week's very frigid weather up in the Northeast. And now we're going to have it under bright and sunny, clear conditions on Saturday. And here to join me is the man who makes the morning line, the DRF handicapper, and all the other good stuff he does, David Aragona. David, thank you so much for joining me on today's Capping the Card.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Happy to talk about some Aqueduct, do a little handicapping, and looking forward to this Withers Day card. I know the Withers isn't always the most prolific Kentucky Derby prep as far as producing starters for the race, but we did see early voting win it last year before going on to win the Preakness, so maybe that'll be starting a new trend.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting day, I think, for New York racing in some extent, because you have both of the top two finishers from the Remsen coming back and running on Saturday, with Arctic Arrogance, of course, running in the Withers, but then also the winner of that race, W&L, running in the Sam F. Davis down at Tampa Bay Downs. So a lot of the road to the Kentucky Derby may go through New York or not. We'll find out a lot this year, but certainly last year's Remsen, of course, people remember early voting and Mo Donegal and all the great racing that was taking place up there, and obviously winning those big Triple Crown races later in the year. So with that being said, let's kick things off. And I personally love to start things off with, and I'm not saying this facetiously, with a maiden special weight race. And so we will start things out here with race one, which is a $70,000 maiden special weight, 6 furlongs for 4-year-olds, fillies and mares. And this is a state restricted race. We agree in complete agreement on this particular one, but why don't you take this start and talk a little bit about why you like Monroe as the top pick in this first race?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a pretty substantial favorite here in this filly who's shipping up from Florida for trainer Todd Pletcher. Todd is sending a few horses up from Florida for this Saturday card at Aqueduct. Interestingly, Jean Velasquez is riding this one. He does not have a mount in the Withers. It's a little bit odd, but he is riding a few of these Todd Pletcher trainees on Saturday. And she's been working pretty well down at Palm Beach Downs in Florida. In fact, one of her workouts for this first-time starter was in company back on December 30th with Bandita, who did win on debut at Gulfstream Park with a 91 Beyer a couple of weeks ago. So she was second best to that filly from what I could see, but she held her own. And just based on that, it seems like she might have too much ability for the New York breds that she's facing in this race. So I put her on top, not expecting to get too much of a price. And we have the same value play. I mean, the number 7, My Angel, not really viewing her as a win candidate, but just thought that she showed enough on debut that she might be able to take a step forward second time out for Mike Maker.
Yeah, absolutely. In agreement about your analysis of the number 6. And I should just point out, Bandita had one of the more impressive debuts as well. It wasn't just a debut winner. It was a really wow moment. I think a lot of people were quite impressed. That filly generated a lot of buzz. So certainly working out alongside, even to be a little slightly second best, certainly nothing to sneeze at there for Monroe. With regards to My Angel, yeah, 8-1 on the morning line. I also view this as more of an underneath play in vertical exotics. I particularly like the fact that it's coming out of Mike Maker's barn, who's winning at 44% in a limited sample size at Aqueduct. And this is a filly who ran into some trouble first time out, stumbled pretty badly and kind of bumped around at the gate. So expecting maybe a slightly cleaner trip this time out, and also getting Lasix for the first time. Relatively winning move from Mike Maker, winning at a 23% clip in maiden special weight second starts when adding Lasix. So definitely like that as an underneath play. Now we're in agreement on race 1. We start to diverge a little bit as we go throughout the card. And as we go to race 2, And this was one, I'll be honest, David, I stared at the past performances of this race for what felt like about 35 minutes. And just, I think I went through every single horse and maybe made them my top pick at some point. But ultimately, I ended up on the number 4, Gandy Dancing, at 6-1 on the morning line. And this is a horse who won last time out. And I think just got the right setup to some extent, but really liked what this horse had to offer in this particular race. Improving speed figures the last couple of times out. One, as I mentioned last time out, in open company. And I also like the fact that this horse seems to attract very good jockeys. 2 out ago, Irad Ortiz Jr. Last time out, Kendrick Carmouche. Kendrick, of course, on the bench, is injured right now. Who does this horse pick up? Dylan Davis, the winningest percentage trainer on the circuit right now. So I like the fact that this, you stay with a hot jockey, 6-1 on the morning line. I like this horse quite a bit. I think this horse should sit a pretty good trip and should sit right behind the early speed of the 1 and the 7. And since we both agree on our same value play, I'll let you talk a little bit about why you like the 1 Foolish Ghost in this race.
Yeah, I like what you said. This was a race that was really difficult to make a morning line for, difficult to make picks for. I mean, I think I have 1-7-2 shot as the slight favorite and 2-4-1 shot. So I really have no idea how the public is going to bet this race. I'm hoping that the number 1 Foolish Ghost gets a little bit overlooked and goes somewhere near that 6-1 morning line. Look, his recent form just hasn't been great, obviously. He's been beaten by double-digit margins a few times in a row, but he's been in some much tougher spots. Horses like Today's Flavor, Sheriff Bianco 2 back. I mean, they're just in a different league than the runners that he's meeting here as he drops down in class for trainer Rudy Rodriguez. And he's the kind of speedball that really needs to be by himself in front to have his best chance. And I think there's a shot that he could get that kind of trip here with Jose Lezcano drawing the rail. He's probably going to go forward. I think he's naturally faster than a horse like the number 7 Bronx Bomber. So I'm just hoping that at this lower level, he gets a little brave on the front end, finding his friends for the $25,000 tag. And as for the number 8 First Deputy, who we both have as our value play, he's coming out of that same race as Gandy Dancing last time. And I thought that he had the much tougher trip because First Deputy broke slowly about a length behind the field. It was of his own doing, but it's not like he has some habit of doing that in his prior races. So I just view it as sort of a fluky thing. But he actually closed pretty well to get up for third that day, despite that poor beginning. And he was making his first start off the claim for trainer Lolita Shivmangal, who doesn't get a whole lot of top horses, but does a pretty good job with the stock that she gets. And he's likely to be a solid price in this race, just given the wide open nature. So he's one that I would like to get somewhere in the exactor trifecta.
Yeah, absolutely. And he seems to be a very consistent horse at this distance too. 7 for 12 in the money, has performed well at Aqueduct as well. 5 for 8 in the money at the track. So definitely a lot to like there. 10-1 using this horse underneath in what feels like a very spready race. If you're playing a horizontal sequence, and if you have a strong opinion in this one, go for it, I'd say. But this is a tough race to look at. But as we move on to the race 3, which is the other stakes race on the card. We mentioned the Withers, but we have the Jimmy Winkfield Stakes as well, named after the Kentucky Derby winning jockey, and 6 furlongs for 3-year-olds. And this is one where it's a small field, only a 5-horse field. And I don't blame you for picking the same top pick and value play as the biggest shot on the board, the number 2 Daydreaming Boy. Talk a little bit about this horse for Lou Linder.
Yeah, he feels like he could be the longest price in this short 5-horse field. And I think that some of the races that he's coming out of at Parks are actually pretty good. Last time out in that Parks Juvenile, he did finish 4th, but he was behind 90% Maddie, who we're going to see in the Withers later in this card. Recruiter, who won that race, seems like a pretty talented runner. And he stayed on pretty gamely at the end over that sloppy track. He wasn't really losing ground to those top 3 at the end of the race. He was just kind of gamely trying through the wire. And his prior starts, I thought they were all pretty solid. He was beaten by another good horse that's still undefeated, 2 back in that stakes race. And I think the slight turn back to 6 furlongs is probably going to benefit him. And just given the unfamiliar out-of-town connections, I feel like he could fly under the radar a little bit and be a bigger price than some others who have run similar speed figures.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about this. Sometimes those Parks horses, when they're coming in and the connections absolutely can fly under the radar. I ultimately went with a couple of other horses in this race, and a horse that just broke his maiden actually is my top pick, and the number 5 Clubhouse, 5-2 in the morning line for Todd Pletcher and Johnny Velasquez. And this is a horse that I think has some interesting running lines. I just kind of tossed the 3 turf races, not as if they were bad necessarily, 2 third place efforts there. But then looking at the other 3 dirt races, a very respectable third place to Litigate, actually, who is running in that aforementioned Sam F. Davis this weekend. And then in the slop, 2 back, and then finally breaks the maiden last time out very easily. And so I just think this is a horse that is bound to take a step forward. 5-2, obviously the second choice on the board. I think that this horse has a real shot. May take a lot of money though, due to the connections, and may get bet down quite a bit. And then from a standpoint of value, the number 3, Cool Calf Mandu, which can be a little bit of a mouthful for me to say all at once, but that's a horse that actually defeated Clubhouse in that one maiden special weight race a couple of races ago in the slop. And this is a horse that I just really like the connections. Charlton Baker is winning 36% of stakes races when he and Dylan Davis team up, who's the jockey, winning at a 23% clip. So definitely some things to like there in what might be a small field, but maybe we get a little bit of a value there, and maybe a horse that you can use in vertical exotics. Let's move on to the 4th race on the card, which is a $50,000 starter allowance for that's going 6 furlongs for 4-year-olds and up. And this is one where I really like a horse that you like a little bit underneath, and that's the number 6 horse, which is Win for Gold for Linda Rice. And this is a little bit more of just a trainer play. Linda Rice winning 26% at this current Aqueduct meet, 26% off the claim as well. The thing that attracted me about Win for Gold is that this horse seems to like 6 furlongs. Both career wins are at this distance, 2 for 4 winning in this regard. I think that this horse should get a decent pace setup as well. I think this horse should sit right behind some of the early speed of the 5 and can kind of stalk and sit maybe a more forward mid-pack trip. I know the last time out was not great, but there are some races to run back to in this horse's form. And it just seems like when this horse gets pushed beyond 6 furlongs, tends to fade a little bit. So I just like the combination of distance and level for this particular horse, Win the Gold. But what drew you to the number 2 horse, All About the Money?
Yeah, I mean, I'll get to your top pick in a little bit. I think he's very live in here. But as for All About the Money, he's making his first start off a trainer switch to David Jacobson. He previously was with Jonathan Wong, who I know has a bit of a relationship with Jacobson, has been getting some horses from him. And I was looking up some stats in DRF Formulator, specifically to David Jacobson making this kind of trainer switch. And over the past 5 years, which is a little weird for Jacobson because he wasn't trading for, I think, about 3.5 of those. But I mean, even recently, off a trainer switch, he's 7 for 16 with a $2.91 ROI. So he does very well with this move. And this horse has solid form out in Southern California, has been going 2 turns, but he's done 1-turn races in the past and basically translated his form pretty well. So I don't mind the turn back to 6 furlongs for him. And I like that he's not in for the tag here because he was competing for some cheaper claiming prices out west. David Jacobson is not afraid to drop a horse off a trainer switch or claim, and he's actually moving this one up in class. So I take that as a good sign for All About the Money. And as for Win for Gold, I think you covered him pretty well. He did run that very good race 2 back for the Linda Rice barn. She lost him for 25,000 and now dips back in to claim him for 35 and moves him up in class, so he's protected. So that's a good sign. I agree with your observation, though. He's a horse that has trouble finishing off his races. He almost looks to me like a horse that might have a breathing issue or just some nagging issue that just like causes him to shorten stride in the last furlong. So I think the 6 furlongs definitely is going to work better for him than the 7 furlongs last time. So he's another one I would want to use in the mix.
Yeah, and then I'll just give out the number 9 as a little bit of a value play as well. This is upper level going off at 8-1 on the morning line, getting the blinkers put on. And this is a horse that is 3 for 3 in the money at 6 furlongs. I'm a little worried about the speed setup. I think the 5 is obviously going to go out and set a pretty aggressive pace. I wonder what the 9 is going to do with the blinkers on. But this horse does have some nice races to run back to. This horse really, with the exception of one maiden special weight race on the turf at 5.5 furlongs, really hasn't run a bad race, honestly. And so I just look at a horse that at 8-1 on the morning line at least gives you an honest effort every time out, and at least can give you a little bit of value, I think, in some vertical exotics. And so that's why I ultimately went with the number 9 there in race 4. Let's move to race 5, which is a $16,000 claimer, 6 furlongs for 4-year-olds and up for fillies and mares. And David, I'll let you kick things off. Captivating Kara, 4-1. What drew you and what captivated you to this particular horse?
Yeah, I feel like there are three horses that probably should take most of the money in this race, and you have one of them on top. I put what I think is going to be the biggest price of those three as
Mm-hmm.
my top pick, Captivating Kara. She's just the kind of horse that doesn't look that sexy. I mean, she's 1 for 29 in her career. She's settled for minor awards a lot of the time. So, I mean, she just doesn't have that winning profile. But she's taking a big drop in class that I think
Yep.
she just really needs. She's been facing much tougher company at the New York bred allowance level. I mean, just looking at her last few races, horses like Can't Hurry Love and Captain's Daughter, Lulu, I mean, they're running buyers in the 80s. And she just clearly is not capable of keeping pace with those kinds of horses. So I think she's dropping down to the right kind of spot. And she could fly under the radar a little bit, maybe be the third choice in this race. So I put her on top. And I say we have the same value play in this race. Darn that song. I'm not really viewing her as a win candidate because I do think one of the three favorites is supposed to win this race. But
Mm-hmm.
if I had to choose somebody at a bigger price, she just seemed like the most likely candidate to get into that superfecta because there are a lot of horses in this race that are a little bit tough to make a case for.
Yes, I would agree with that assessment. That's a very nice way to put it. And so, yeah, I went with, you mentioned Holiday Jazz, the 10, a horse that'll probably be on the lead, and at 5-2 for Rudy Rodriguez. This is a horse that I just, I think that you can make some excuses for why this horse may not have run particularly well the last couple of times in terms of maybe track conditions, etc. But I think this horse should get on the lead and certainly has races that are good enough to win this race. I think shortening up a little bit is going to help this particular horse. So again, another horse that seems to have a trouble finishing at 7 furlongs. Maybe the cut back to 6 is what this horse needs. And I know Rudy's been a little bit cold at Aqueduct thus far, but he's a barn that can heat up in a hurry. And so using this horse up top from that far outside post position. And then, yeah, Darn That Song just seems to make a lot of sense. Seems to be more interested in getting minor awards, but seems to be relatively consistent at getting those awards compared to certainly the rest of the field. A little bit like the horse I mentioned in the previous race, just seems pretty consistent. You don't see massive fluctuations in the buyer speed figures from race to race, and you kind of know what you can rely on in Darn That Song. So if you're, again, including a little bit more value underneath in a vertical exotic, makes some sense there. Let's move to the 6th race on the card, which is a maiden special weight. And this is I think, a really intriguing race and a really interesting one with some big first-time starters. And we're on kind of opposite ends of that. And it's the top 2 choices in this particular race. My top pick is Moore's Law, 3-1 on the morning line for Chad Brown with Dylan Davis aboard. And Chad has been having a very good meet up at Aqueduct, as he always seems to have very good meets up in New York. And it's interesting because I don't know if you've noticed this, David. It's something I play Gulfstream Park a lot. I play a lot of the Florida tracks regularly. He's not really had as much of a presence down in Gulfstream, I feel like, this winter as he normally does. And so it's interesting because to some extent I was like, where is Chad Brown? Where are all of his horses? And then I started handicapping this card and I was like, oh, he's just winning everything up in New York. That's what he's doing. I ultimately, like I said, landed on Moore's Law. This is Colt from Good Magic. Good Magic, very precocious first out starters, actually has already produced 2 winners out of 4 runners who have tried to run for the first time at 3-year-olds. And so I thought that was something to certainly make note of. The works have looked very solid at Belmont. This just seems like a horse that is going to be pretty primed to run. Well, I should mention your selection, though, Ever So Mischievous, is a Triple Crown entry, though, for Brad Cox. And so talk a little bit about, obviously, a barn that is very trusted and very, very capable at getting maidens across the finish wall line first.
Yeah, it feels like there are 2 first-time starters in this race that could take a lot of money, and you highlighted Moore's Law. And it's definitely not a negative when Chad Brown debuts a horse at Aqueduct. Arguably, some of the best dirt horses he's had in recent years have run at Aqueduct. So I don't think that's a negative at all. And he's been working well down at Payson Park. So I expect a good effort from him. But I think the number 9, Ever Mischievous for Brad Cox, also is pretty live coming into this race. Kind of a weird detail about this horse is that he's listed as an $85,000 2-year-old purchase. That was actually at the Horses of Racing Age sale at Keeneland last year in November. Prior to that, he sold for $600,000 as a yearling.
Wow.
So he was resold for a lot less money. That's just a little bit. It's odd. He was
Yeah.
purchased for 600,000 by China Horse Club, and now he's with Qatar Racing. So not sure what to make of that. But what I do know is since he started on the racetrack and actually, logging some timed workouts, he's been really tearing it up in the morning. And
Yep.
it seems, based on what I've looked into, some of the horses he's been working with, that he's been outworking most of the horses he's paired with in his gate works. So it feels like he's a horse that might have quite a bit of speed. Obviously, a son of Into Mischief. He's out of a dam that won the Grade 3 Fantasy. So there's definitely pedigree there. So feels like one that could be pretty live. I'm interested to see what we get from both of these first-time starters. And as for the value play, I went to the number 7, Fast Boat to Sky, one of the experienced runners in this field. I just think cutting back in distance is really going to be the right move for this horse. They tried a mile last time, and I don't think he wanted to go that far, but also January 21st at Aqueduct was one of the days where we saw a significant rail bias, and he was outside the entire way. So I don't think that performance is nearly as bad as it seems, and he might be one that slips through the cracks, just given some of the high-profile firsters, and goes off at a bigger price.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to see the board probably float up a little bit because of you mentioned how attractive these first timers are for two very, very good barns in Chad Brown and Brad Cox. I ultimately went to the number 4 as a little bit of a value play when Love Takes Over. This is a horse I remember both Andy Serling and Sarah Albadwi really liked on Talking Horses in debut. And so I was only reminded that after Sarah texted me about it after I was capping the card last night. And so I need to keep better note of those things. But this is a horse that I thought ran very well in debut, finished a very respectable 4th, just finishing off by about 3 lengths, was a little slow out of the gate. That's something that, you'd hope to see get cleaned up this next time out. Has logged some nice workouts since that particular race for trainer Andrew Lakeman. So I just thought this is a horse that has shown some ability and is a known commodity. We'll see if runs better. Obviously, that debut was on a sloppy sealed surface. We'll see if runs a little bit better on a fast, dry track. But that's where I ultimately went with some value. I'm going to stop here for a second, though, David, and ask you a real quick question. You mentioned rail bias, and I must say, in the times that when I follow Aqueduct, I'm always intrigued by. It does seem like there's either a golden rail or a dead rail sometimes, and I'm curious. For people watching Aqueduct and following the card, you and Andy tend to be very good at identifying it very early. What are things you look for early in a card that might indicate that there's a rail bias and then change the way you might approach the rest of the races from there on out?
Yeah, biases are one of the great debates in horse racing because it's something that's a little bit hard to quantify. And I think people that aren't really, I don't want to say good, but people that aren't constantly looking for them, I think sometimes can miss reasons that a rail bias might be popping up or disappearing. And, at Aqueduct, there's always some kind of weather situation going on with temperature fluctuations and moisture in the track, certain parts, draining. And so you do tend to see some of the times the rail getting particularly good or bad. And what I look for are just horses outrunning their expected outcomes on a certain part of the track. So if you see a lot of favorites riding the rail to victory, probably doesn't mean anything, probably just means the results are logical. But when I see a 10-to-1 shot come up the rail that I didn't expect to run that well, I start to think, okay, well, was the rail helping anybody else today? So I think those are things to be aware of, and just results that look especially lopsided. Like in the race I was talking about with Fast Boat to Sky, the 2 horses that rode the rail in that race were Slip Mahoney and Krupe, the first 2 finishers, who I think are pretty good, and they were the 2 favorites, but they finished 15 lengths ahead of the rest of the field, which is not something you see that often. So I think that they were helped along by that bias a little bit, and some others maybe their performances, the margins of defeat were exaggerated by that bias. So I just like to look for those things that are a little bit outside of the realm of what you would have expected to see.
Yeah, great explanation, and something that's very helpful. Like you said, try to identify it early in a card, and sometimes can make some variations and fluctuations with how you might play the rest of the card. As we continue on to the 7th race, another one that I must say had me a little perplexed and scratching in my head at times. We ultimately ended up on the same top pick. This is a $25,000 claiming race going a mile for 4-year-olds and up. Why don't you talk a little bit about your top pick in Pit Boss for Rob Atras?
Yeah, I'm not happy to have this horse on top of Pit Boss. I'm scratching into him. I originally had liked the number 1A Caribbean in this race, but he's entered back on Sunday, so he's going to be forced to run then. He'll have to scratch on Saturday's card. So I elevate Pit Boss to my top pick, and I don't really like him in this race. I wish I'd kind of reordered my picks so I wouldn't have him on top, but I do have to submit my picks well ahead of time, so I'm kind of stuck with my initial take on the race. He is first off the claim for Rob Atris, and Rob Atris's horses just tend to do well first off the claim. I looked in Dira Formulator in a large sample at Aqueduct over 5 years with nearly 100 starters. He has a positive ROI first off the claim at Aqueduct, which is just kind of mind-boggling. This horse does have some good recent form. He's been claimed away from trainer Lynn Cash, who I worry sometimes when you claim from Lynn Cash, who is a trainer that tends to get the most out of his horses and runs them very often. So you wonder a little bit about the condition of horses that get claimed from him. But he is coming out of a pretty good last out effort. He was facing arguably a tougher field at this $25,000 level. So I think he's going to run well. I'm not excited about the price. My value play in this race would be the number 8 Irish Honor, who maybe I would have made my top pick if I had to redo things. He's another one of these park shippers that I think is coming out of some races that actually stack up pretty well from a class standpoint. And this trainer hasn't had a whole lot of success on the NYRA circuit, but he's going to be a decent price. So he's one that I would play around with a little bit in this race.
Yeah, absolutely. As I kind of alluded to early in this one, feels like a very wide open race, to be honest. And so definitely feels like an opportunity to get a little bit of a price. I ultimately, like I said, ended up also on the 3 Pit Boss. And this is one where, just to quantify what you were saying, Rob Atris winning 33% of his entries at this Aqueduct meet, 25% off the claim right now. When he and Franco team up, they're winning 33% of the races with a 243 ROI. So again, a lot of trainer and jockey stats that kind of point you towards this horse being pretty logical, in addition to the decent recent form. I went to the inside, Grump's Little Tots, just because it's also a ridiculous name. But I think that this is a race that will have a pretty strong pace up front. And so I look to the 2 as kind of the best closer in the group and just has really good late speed. This is a horse that really closed a little bit from the clouds last time out, was sitting 13 lengths back, 10 lengths back at second call, and then ends up winning by 2, is stepping back up a little bit in class, was running in a claiming 20 race last time, now in a claiming 25, has maybe not had all the success at that claiming 25 level. But I just think this horse does have some races to run back to. And I do think the pace setup is going to work out nicely. This horse is 4 for 11 winning at a mile. So I think the 1-turn mile is going to work out nicely. And also has run historically pretty well at Aqueduct, 7 for 13 in the exacta. So a horse that's been reliable on this track at this distance. And like I said, should get a nice pace setup there for me as a value play in race 7. Well, let's move to race 8, which is another intriguing race, an $82,000 allowance. And this is one that is a mile for 4-year-olds and up. There's a few, I think, really noteworthy horses in this particular race. And I ultimately went with a horse that sometimes I just get sentimental with my picks. And Silver Seeker was a horse that I was just kind of sentimental about when I had the opportunity to pick this horse again. 9-2 on the morning line. Why am I sucker for this horse? This horse took 3 years off and then came back, and after a leg stretcher, won second back from a 3-year layoff. And so you just don't see that every day of the week. And that was a really good effort. And so this is a horse that's coming back from a little bit of a freshening, just a small, relatively short layoff. And I think fits in this spot relatively well. And I just, like I said, like the fact that this horse posted a career best figure last time out. I think we're starting to see what this horse was truly capable of. This was a very accomplished horse, or an ascending horse, certainly before this horse went to the bench for 3 years. And like I said, is now back in better form for a trainer I really trust in this particular spot, and has been working out nicely and regularly down at Turfway Park, actually. But that's where my heart led me in race 8. And I'm curious, what led you to McAllen as your top pick in this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is a race where I think the favorites, or the horses that are going to be single-digit odds, they look pretty strong.
Yeah.
Patient Capital is very much the horse to beat, even though we don't have him on the grid here. But McAllen is a horse for Todd Pletcher, one of 2 Pletcher has in here, that's coming off a very long layoff. He showed some promise last year. I think he actually ran on Sam F. Davis Day in 2022 when he broke his maiden. He's only run twice since then, and I think both times he just didn't get ideal trips. He just kind of got lost in the slot top to back at Keeneland. That was a race that was dominated more towards the front, and he just kind of got slung with kickback the entire way, and never looked like he really had his mind on running that day.
Yeah.
And then last time at Churchill, just got caught behind a slow pace. I think Florent Giroux made a little bit of a tactical error in that race, taking him too far back. He was running on at the end. He's been on for a long time, but Pletcher has very good stats off layoffs, especially in dirt routes at Aqueduct. So I think that this horse is going to deliver a good effort coming off the layoff. So I put him on top, and I see we have the same value play in here. Again, not viewing Royal Trist as a win candidate, but he's just a horse that is hard trying, typically outruns his odds, has speed figures that really do make him somewhat competitive in here. So he's the kind of horse that I think you could use in trifectas and supers.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about Royal Trist. Just a horse that, like you said, outruns its odds. I do think the favorites are pretty strong in this particular race. So trying to look past that at a horse that might be able to get the better of one or maybe two of these favorites, Royal Trist seems to fit that bill as just a hard-knocking horse and a very honest runner. You mentioned the number 5, Patient Capital, is the morning line favorite. Getting blinkers put on. I don't know if this is why you were, maybe looking past this horse or trying to beat this horse. This horse also has a tendency to finish second a lot, second 4 the last 5 times out. Getting blinkers on, so that might be something that benefits the horse. But 2-1 on a horse that likes to finish second a lot, I just couldn't really swallow that pill. So that's ultimately why I kind of was trying to look outside of the morning line favorite for another choice. But certainly you're right, from a buyer speed figure standpoint, from just a general form standpoint, certainly the horse to beat in this particular field.
Yeah, he's a horse whose form is very exposed at this point. He's gotten very good trips in his races, and yes, he comes in with the best speed figures, but I agree. Horses like that are supposed to get the job done more than he has.
Yeah. Well, we've agreed a fair amount, particularly underneath on a few races, and now we're completely different in this in the big race. And so the 9th race of the grade is the grade 3 Withers, 1 1/8 for 3-year-olds. And David, I'll let you start things off talking about this Bill Mott horse who just broke its maiden, Jungfrau. I assume that's how you pronounce it, because I actually have relatives with the last name Jung, and they pronounce it Young. So I assume that's how you pronounce this horse's name. But Bill Mott, certainly a big barn right now with Art Collector and Rocket Can the last 2 weeks, big time wins in stakes races. So what drew you to this particular horse?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jungfrau as well. I know he hasn't crossed the wire first yet, but I think that this horse has run better than it looks in really all 3 of his starts. I mean, I think 7 furlongs is just too short for him on debut. And he did try this 1 1/8 distance at Aqueduct already. And some might knock him for fading at the end of that race, but I would advise you to go back and watch the trip that he got, because it was just a very uncomfortable journey. And Jose Ortiz had to alter course multiple times. I think he kind of gave up on him a little prematurely in that race, and he just stuck him down on the rail in the stretch. And he had more run to give, but just was on the wrong part of the racetrack, fading at the very end. And he got the job done last time out via the steward's help, getting elevated to victory. It was a legitimate put up by disqualification. He got bothered at the top of the stretch. I know the speed figures are a little bit light. I just feel like this horse has been taking a step forward from a development standpoint with every start. And Bill Mott has really strong numbers off of maiden wins in dirt routes with 3-year-olds. He's looking it up in Formulator. He's 10 for 39, a 222 ROI. So I think this horse, of the 3 horses that I think are going to take money, he'll be the best price. So I'm going with Jungfrau in the Withers. And my price horse would be the number 6, 90% Maddie, another one of these park shippers. I've got a few of them that I'm interested in on this Saturday card. Distance is a real question for him, but I was, again, playing around in Formulator, as I like to do, looking for some stats to see how his trainer does with runners like this. And I found this crazy stat for trainer Bush Reed. With horses trying a route for the first time in stakes races on dirt for Butch Reed, he's 5 for 9, 56% with a $12 ROI. So, I mean, he's done this very well with price horses in the past.
Yeah.
I can't say that I love this horse's form, but at around the price I think he's going to be, he's one that I would want to include.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went in a slightly different direction with this one. I looked at this race from a standpoint of pace setup, and there seems to be a lot of early front end speed. I think certainly you can look at the number 1 horse, Arctic Arrogance, the number 2 horse, Prove Right. Certainly Andiamo a Firenze on the outside. 90% Maddie may very well be forwardly placed as well. And so I kind of looking at young horses going 9 furlongs. I just kind of thought, who's going to be running late? And the answer to me was Hit Show for Brad Cox. This is a horse that has the best late speed figures in the field, according to Timeform US. And so this is a horse that has, I also think, has had its form flattered a little bit in the last week or so, in that the only race this horse lost was to Confidence Game, who, of course, finished third at the Lecomte. Second in that race was Rocket Can, who just won the Holy Bull. So certainly coming out of a very solid race and no damage to this horse, finishing fourth in that particular race. And I should point out, went off as the morning line favorite in all three of those races that this horse has run. Ascending speed figures, like I said, I just think this horse maybe gets the right trip and the right pace setup. And for my value play, I just went to maybe Hit Show Light in terms of general banker, in terms of another horse that should come running a little bit late, has decent late speed. It might be a little bit more forwardly placed than Hit Show, but I just thought at 8-1 in the morning line, the horse has shown some ability to kind of run underneath, has been running primarily in state restricted races, but ran a decent third last time out in that Jerome against Arctic Arrogance. Again, I view General Banker as more of a horse to use underneath rather than a true win candidate, but definitely excited to see how this one goes. I don't know about you, but I just get so excited with these preps because it's so much unknown and potential. And you just hope to see something special on a day where these 3-year-olds are kind of finding themselves for the first time to some extent.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out. It's fun to follow along the entire prep season. I'm actually doing a YouTube series on Daily Racing Form's channel with Brad Free this season, where we're tracking the top Derby contenders every week, and it's cool to see how the picture changes from week to week based on how these preps shake out. And I'll just say before we wrap up this race, I like Hit Show as well. I mean, he's my second pick in this race, and yeah. I would want to use him with Youngfrau. I'm very much interested in those two horses. It's just, the difference maker for me was, as you were kind of pointing out, the public seems to have this love affair with Hit Show, and they just bet him in every race. So yes. I wonder what kind of price he's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one of the many Brad Cox horses that is on the Derby Trail this year as well. I just feel like if you're not talking about a Bob Baffert horse, you're certainly talking about a Brad Cox horse, it seems. And just to show you the depth of his field, I mean, he was the third choice before he scratched out of the Southwest Stakes down at Oaklawn Park a couple of weeks ago. So just an incredibly deep barn and kind of an embarrassment of riches on the Derby Trail this year for Cox. Let's move to the final race on the card. And this is the 10th race, $25,000 maiden claimer, 6 furlongs for 3-year-olds, and this is a state-restricted race. And David, I normally love trying to find a big price in a maiden claiming race, and I don't know what I'm going to have to do for penance that I'm choosing the chalk in a maiden claimer, but that's ultimately where I ended up. And to some extent, for some of the reasons we've already talked about, trainer Linda Rice off the claim in these types of races just at such a high percentage play, and so. Like I said, I ultimately ended up on the number 4, Central Love, 9-5 in the morning line, getting Lasix for the first time, has run, I think, very well all 3 times out, is coming off a little bit of a layoff. Like I said, Rice is 26% off the claim, 44% first time off the claim in maiden claiming races, and interestingly, 33% off, 33% winning off the bench in a layoff in maiden claiming races. So just however you want to parse up these statistics, she's really turning in a lot of winners in this particular race. This is another race, similar to one we talked about earlier. Hard to make a case maybe for several horses in this field, but ultimately felt that Central Love at 9-5 just felt too logical up top not to use. And so that's where I went there, but definitely took a long look at your number 8, 4 Eyes. So I'm interested in what drew you to that particular horse.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm a little bit against Central Love in this race, just because despite those good stats, she claimed this horse 3 months ago, and it's like, where has this horse been for 3 months? And she's dropping it off the claim. So I have some reservations at what figures to be a short price, because like you said, there aren't that many contenders in this race. So I wanted to go to the next most logical horse, 4 Eyes. Who is just taking the biggest drop in racing from maiden specialweight down to maiden claiming. And I think this is a horse that ran okay for the maiden specialweight level, but just probably needs this drop in class. And some people might be turned off of him because of his last race where it seemed like his form really dipped, but I'm not going to be too hard on him for that race because that was one of the toughest New York bred maiden races that we've seen run, I think, on the circuit this entire year. Maker's Candy, who won that race, I think he got a 90 Byron victory.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if they're going to try a New York bred on the Derby Trail, but I mean, he ran that kind of race.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to be hard on Four Eyes, and Eric Hansel just basically could see that he wasn't winning the race at the top of the stretch and just eased him home, took care of the horse. So, I mean, he's cutting back to a more appropriate distance. And his trainer, Ralph D'Alessandro, is a guy that doesn't typically take a lot of money, but is one of these under the radar, underrated trainers during the winter at Aqueduct that can strike with a price seems like he has a few every season at Aqueduct. So Four Eyes, I'm hoping he's one of those. So he's my pick in this race. And I see we also like, the one bigger price that we have in our mix, the number 11, Cam Duke, who, the reason I put him there was because I already talked about that January 21st card having a bit of a rail bias, and he was chasing outside the entire way. So just feel like maybe his last race is a little bit better than it looks.
Yeah. And to your point, when you take a closer look at the racing form, obviously the winner that day, Mama's Gold, wins by 21.25 lengths. So yes, lost by, the horse lost by 22.5 lengths, but it was really, second best to the second place finisher. And it was pretty close up in that regard. It just feels like a good horse, good early speed, gets an outside post. I also really like the bullet work on February 3rd, a 48.3 for furlong work. So this horse should absolutely show some speed from the gate, and just think there's a strong possibility this horse finds itself pretty close up. And again, in a race where it's hard to make a case for a lot of horses, I can make a case for the 11 in this particular spot, and might even put a few bucks on him to win as well, just because, like I said, I'm not 100% sold necessarily on the rest of this field. So that is how David and I see it on Saturday at Aqueduct. And David, I just want to say thank you again for coming on and joining me. And I'm pretty sure everybody who's watching this knows you already, but just let the folks know what all you're working on. You mentioned a Derby Contenders, a YouTube series that you got, and what are all the other things you have going on?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And you can follow me on Twitter. First of all, at Horse to Watch. I should have put that in my name section there. But I do write-ups for NYRA every day. You can find those on the NYRA.com website and also DRF.com, handicapping these Aqueduct races and all the NYRA tracks. I do some video work for the Daily Racing Form. Like I said, I'm doing that series with Brad Free right now. We're talking about Derby Contenders. I also do handicapping content every week that you can find on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel. And I have a podcast with my colleague Craig Milkowski, who makes the Timeform US speed figures. So we do a recap show and do some handicapping every week. So you can also find that on DRF's channels.
One of my favorite things to listen to is the two of you talk about that stuff.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So David, thank you again. And for all of you watching, make sure to like this video. Make sure to comment below with who you think is your best bet and best value play on the Saturday Aqueduct card, who you think is going to win the Withers. And make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits. Finally, make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.